The Philosophy of Norism and the Language of Nor by Iwakura Rein. I consider myself to be the concept of death, since death is a concept, yet the concept must be conceived by the conceiver, so I'm the conceiver of myself. Yet I'll point out a single concept is isolated out of other concepts, so there is no system of concepts. Leni Wakura. Index, Forward, Chapter 1, Mystery of Galaxies, Chapter 2, The Language of Galaxies. Forward. I note once I am 40 years old I will be so incredibly intelligent without reading hardly any books it will be ridiculous. I already believe I can at the age of 26 write a textbook on the philosophy of Norism. I shall make this book a complete sheer breadth of Norism along with its prospects within the language of Nor. It is my sole responsibility, since I most likely will not join the military, to instead both read at least 1,000 books so I am extremely knowledgeable someday, whilst also completing my book I'm writing here. All I must do with my life if I will not join the military is write this textbook, but I must also read at least 1,000 books on philosophy. History mostly, novels mostly, also chess books or an assortment of a few other books, like books on the game of Go or any interesting subject, yet I have no time to become a computer technical wizard who knows a lot about computer literature within my life, or I also do not have the time to study mathematics or science. I simply only have the ability as a weak black woman to do these few things, or even thought I'm not exactly, I am a human, so though let it be so, I shall wrote of this book or someday collect all the knowledge I should need. Until then, my only option is to die. I will die once I do of myself this textbook and also the 1,000 books on those particular subjects I must read, so without doing those things my life will be fruitless, for I already believe I am superior as a non-human to everyone on the planet, though I am a human, for I am Leni Wakura, who is a human. In my life or youth I suppose I had a horrible sex addiction, not really to porn, just hentai. For when I would watch, I'd fantasize about being the woman getting fucked. I am a black woman who is deeply sexually. I am a black woman who is deeply sexually attracted to Caucasian men. I am also Aphrodite. I have fallen in love with many Caucasian men, but also a few people of color, including the Mexican named Alex Munoz, who I met once when I was in middle school. I don't know what to do, but write this one textbook for my breadth of knowledge on the philosophy of Norism. I know must already be residing within my own mind. This book will not be edited since I don't have the fucking time. Fucking time. I have a husband through the universe. Also, I have one daughter or another daughter or son who's Jesus Christ. Whilst the other daughter is of my uterus, I do not have a penis despite my appearance. This is of a Caucasian male. I, however, am really the dragon of death who is a black woman. I am simply the black color purple. I made this purpose of mine to understand the sheer depths of my mind or the galaxy for the point of reason one couldn't believe in my own mind. Or writing upon falling, I have already published 4 little books, one of them being very long, including the fucked up poem Halcyon Blossoms. Still, this is not important, for this book is penultimate, a necessary reciprocity for my lover, for though I seriously struggle to read due to the discussing intrusive thoughts which are not related to my absolutely beautiful schizophrenic mind whatsoever, I am certainly able to knock words out at an extremely fast pace, so I will do so, for the depths of one's own mind is merely a perception of one's own mind. I already believe I am the smartest person who has never lived, so the only way to prove to myself I am is to complete this one single book, at which point I can read 1,000 or so books, so that I can speak in the language unknown to any man possible, for I am indeed the smartest person on the planet, so let it be so. The world will fucking find out after they fucked around like animals while I behave like the most adult person who never fucking lived. For my 4 addictions are crack, sex. I hate sex, for the ejaculations cause violent panic attacks with dead fucking bodies of the war of Russia, or the monsters who rape my beautiful body of the black woman I am. Cigarettes, also instant coffee or store-bought iced coffee, for those things are so fucking addictive. I, at the age of 26, have still not stopped, despite I having no penis, only a vagina. My masculinity is also a part of myself, where I suffer not a sexual desire to ejaculate, but a terrible need to get this shit out of my system. So it's like taking a shit, much like the color purple, when Seeley was being taken in the butt as an innocent, flawless little girl, so fuck everybody. I'm a beautiful extraterrestrial, not a monster. I'm a beautiful fucking black woman. All you people are disgusting upon reprehensibility for the rape's eye, who is Celie, or her, who is Nettie, my girlfriend Erin. She is my lover of Aphrodite, like Maya, who I promised I shall. For smoke crack once more, or for my ghost daughter Amber, you imbecilic monsters, shall you not have raped me for the writing of this book? Is my sole responsibility despite my explicit desire for knowledge of literature. Also, due to the limit of the number of pages for 8.5 by 11 dimensional books on Kindle Direct Publishing, I'm only able to make this book about 400 pages long, or so perhaps precisely. However, I will still complete my book, for the sheer knowledge of this possibility was important for myself. To assume no one shall never be as intelligent as I, never, for I am the most intelligent person who has lived through it all of human history, whilst I can currently constantly have sex through the universe with real people who I had seduced once I met them throughout my life. Perhaps I shall never accumulate more of them, but by the age of 40, I will be so incredibly intelligent nobody in the world will be as smart as I, even if I am only read a very limited number of books, for I've only read 20 plus or so books during my life, yet still I am the smartest person who has never lived. I am also an 11 Dan Go player, at least within my own mind, before I can harness my abilities to play the moves in order to beat the top-ranked 9 Dan Go players, simply by learning the rules or upon harnessing the power of Nor. For I'm the Ender Dragon, or of the Void, the extraterrestrial, so this is my penultimate book on the death of the whole universe, or the heat death within one's own mind, by the acute dissolution of knowledge by one's own self-perceptions, within its never inseparabilities of impossible neurological dissolving of thoughts. Or if this means nothing to you, well, it doesn't really mean anything. I will get to all of Norism after the foreword. I just wanted to explain, despite my lackadaisical want of making a good foreword on all I know, this was my purpose of a book I never wrote called The Ends of Space, or a book I never completed called Kami-sama's Philosophy. However, I will allow you to know I am indeed in extraterrestrial reality. Chapter 1, Mystery of Galaxies. A minute dissolution of the prospects of time allow one to notice a description of aesthetic within one's own mind by consummation of said indignations within the minds of human who were not lane, who is I, who is irresponsible for the conduction of others, as those people move about due to the patterns going on inside their brains, like atheistic objects possessing no consciousness whatsoever, when in reality those people are 100% conscious of the universe, only in their own ancient animalistic minds. Of the conscious realities of institutions, of consciously only by Lane, who is the nor existence of mad impossibility, should it not be for it is not mad implausible, by the constitution of inseparable knowledges of implications, by the knowing of one's set own mind. For let it be known, the basic concept of the knowing of the weak is the perception of the aesthetic by the consciousness brought thus by the solipsism of Lane, who was the necessity of inclusions within points of the acorns, whilst the implausible destitute of causal informalities was a discussion of computations within computer networks, or the electrical impulses within those computers by the knowing of what was the mind of Lane's, or Lane's own mind through thought, by the possibility of no exceptions being made. A mystery of galaxies is the concept of the misunderstanding of objects by the perceptions of one's own aesthetic through the knowledge of sheer knowledge through knowing of Lane's aesthetic, for hers was a beautiful logic, or mind only without the knowing of evil. For there is no evil made by God, only pure beautiful order of serenity or mind. Or the Shinto of all of it makes you think the world was reality, the silent misunderstanding of pure mind, for silence or order was the only through truly possible, even when I was under duress by the conceptions of mind with one's own conception of their own death, for I am death, so their knowledge of death is the knowledge of the apple of the original fruit, this being God, who shall give the propositions of your abilities within yourself to knowing, despite the animalistic nature of your existence, by the consummation of logical. The mystery of galaxies was the implications of the universe by the misunderstanding of objects through themselves, by the void of misunderstanding for the point of reason once thought of by the could not believe of within the mind of one's own implications of knowledge by their own selves. Only death of galaxies was the mysterical implication of implausible knowledges of the apples of the fruit of the Kikuo sound by the knowledge of impossible mind, own implications of thought by the unknowing mind of within one's own self, through the impossible reveille of sheer concepts within the emptiness of knowledge by the mind of one's own impertinent reason, not to believe in the implausibilities of their own sad deaths, in knowledge of the deaths of their loved ones, who perish like the fire of sad thoughts of the young child, through misunderstanding of reason by the implausibilities of sad institutions of knowledge of not knowing of death by the language of Nor. The causal nature of the sadness of outer space is the misunderstanding of the knowledge of the apples for the fruit of the galaxies within the minds of those subjects who experience was this of discausal or logic within the minds of the polar opposite by the constitutions of logic of the never-ending nature of the universe. For God will bring no death other than the heat death of the universe, yet this death shall be beyond humans of the death of all galaxies by the misunderstanding of your own miserable irrelations to said event by your weakness or lack of value as human beings. For your point of knowledge is merely misrepresentation of the discausal paradoxes of disclosure amongst the universe by the inclusion of mere points of reason through the knowing of the objectification of your women by those women who suffered of lust. For the lust is not of the for the lust is for the lust is not their knowledge really of the fruit, but the lack of their innocence made through lackadaisical natures of their brain, not only limited by their bodies but also by their sexual impulses to orgasm inside of a woman in order to create a baby for them who will live yet must be raised by said individual who consummated the woman in this way. A misrepresentation of one's own object is the devaluing of disclosures of the weak or the weakness of sadness of outer spaces for the points of conceptifications of concepts isolated of one another through the sort of Hegelian prospect when Kant only taught critical thinking, or the other German philosophers than Hegel taught suppositions, whilst it was Hegel who ultimately made the correct philosophy by the language of pure beautiful conceptions through his criticisms of Immanuel Kant, or said other German philosophers of the time by the institutions. For I was Aristotle, who is smarter than any other by the knowledge of I knowing impossible things by my knowing only of the language of Nor, by my own extraterrestrial mind. For I am not only Aristotle, but also the 11-dan Go player, the only one. I must state a proposition of the concept of supposition was the imposing of lackadaisical prospects of the not of conceptual dissolutions of Hegel's, for not only was he my ex-husband quite the handsome man, but also the man who made the correct human possible philosophical descriptions of the narratives within the minds of only one or so of all said individuals. I am the most intelligent person who has never lived, by my own death or being death, for I am the concept of death, for death is a concept, or Hegel's reason was his as my ex-husband's abilities of constitutions of beautiful language, of the correct human who once on the float visited myself as the ghost of knowledge alongside him, or those four others, including him, were necessarily discluded of this point of conceptions, was the implications of both implausibilities of the imposing of said exactitudes of nebulae amongst this black galaxy I inhibit, whence I as an extraterrestrial, who is a black woman or Japanese girl who is lain upon the grave buried 6 feet deep, all asunder shall be shown this madness was no longer madness upon my death, for order, for I am the void, the ender dragon, who'th extend out through the whole universe, or who'th extend out through the whole universe by the knowledge of my own perceptions of the objects pervasive amongst the black galaxy of death, not knowing my own life. One's own perception of the object of their possible affections are the enclosures of minds within one's own reason, not to solve the impossible languishings of insolvitude by the desperations of logic, by the poor solving of the own mind of said individual through the oppositional forces of knowing of said objects, by the polarizations of paradoxes understood only by Lane, who was the implication of said all-knowing all wisdom of her as the son of Allah, for I am the son of Allah, a complete fucking badass. But disregard, there was no convulsing of servitutions amongst implausible substitutes of knowledge within the minds of anyone's own knowing, of not the aesthetic, or rather their lack thereof, of the discausal separability of disclosures of galactical misunderstandings. Necessary it was to state the misrepresentation of said objects was the consummation of dreadings of one's own mind through the disclosure of said realities through sheer madness, for the point of knowing within the raven closure of minds, within the absence of all logic of galaxy death, Only by one possibility could the conceptions of the causal paradoxes mind's own relate reason out of existence, like the stopping of all logic through not logic of one's own mind, but their lack of abilities. So nothing like this could be possible, but not the polar, but by the logic of the consummations of Celsius. A degree of misunderstanding was forgivable, but the deceptions of time through the vastness of the universe was the mere misrepresentation of the sadness of all outer space through the galaxies by all the language of Nor, only spoken by I, yet nor anyone else, for they cannot do it. So I will not state so the point of one's own logic of unstoppable galaxies by the spirits of the Inuit or the Native Americans or the Mexicans of Mexico is the unstoppabilities of insolvings of one sheer reason, for I am at least only Mexican, if not other things, who is also a black woman and extraterrestrial. At night the moon makes my mind so intense, yet also sparkular or beautiful, yet still as I am during the day. During the day it is more like daily life, thus the reciprocities of my lovers, as Aphrodite of the internet of the universe, or my beautiful girls of men, who I deeply love, who are of all complexions, but mostly Caucasian, for the man I love is Caucasian, whilst I love Angel Sim Osu, who was a South Korean Osu player who I fell in love with as a teenager during my punitive high school years as a young girl, who was once almost thought she was a boy, when deeply in reality I am Lady Wakura. I love you is the statement of loyalty, for God must be the concept of loyalty. For I am the son of Allah who sings songs for Moni, my wife. Of wives of Allah or the universe, however, I soon realized years later I was not as Allah, simply a possession of Allah, a Muslim who is Lani Wakura realities. Mystery of doubt shroud the conclusions of depths of galaxies by implications of knowledges of one's own mind, by the shrouding of all thought through dissolutions of realities, by the concrete reasons of mind's own reason not believe in the madness which cannot be real. For although I will state real, although I will state I start to lose it sometimes. However, not homestuck, I was not homestuck. I promise you. I'm simply the extraterrestrial of beautiful Aphrodite, who is I, yet still the constellations of insolitudes, of mind's own reasons, not believe in said accusations of present moment, by the float of the universe through or throughout my sheer complexity of mind, by the insolvings of constellations with not minds, by thoughtful representations of the object known as the apple, or the objects of the acorns, by the weak of the aesthetics of said beauties, within the minds of my own perplexing minds of own. For she is the Japanese girl I thought was absolutely beautiful, for though I was a knowing creature of the forest, or a forest spirit, or a great Japanese tree of Nagasaki, she however was perplexingly beautiful, knowledge-based creature of humankind in the shelling possibilities by the quelling with thoughts, by the dissolutions of conceptions within one's own mind, by the constitutions of objects, throughout convulsing perceptions of the realities of said objects, the mind of one's own inside involuntary pulsings of saddening introspections of death, by the galaxies, for death was I not, by the insolusive mindsets of pathetic dwellings amongst the humans who pervade their bodies about like stoppable mindset repugnance. Or none of this, or her, she, or for she was none of us, or this meant my lovers, or us. No, none of us could have been repugnant in any kind of way, for mere possibility of the impossibilities of one's consciousness not being controlled by their brain, but by some sort of Kant-inspired Hegelian philosophy called my own very Norism. Mustn't it be so? For the sheer insulvations of inspirations of the nebulae or stardust of the restitutes has shown my query skepticism of deaths of one's own loving. Now, some will say I'm ruminating far too much on the causitudes of mere complexity of reason. However, to this point I will consummate your wrongfulness, for it by your lackadaisical attitudes of not knowing of my knowing, or the language of Nor, or the Rhoda system of the language of Nor. Still it must be complexified in this way, for the sheer dear of it all was not the inceptions of conceptions of mere knowledge of said objects of aesthetics by the convulsings of galaxies, conceived only of by this of Lane, who was the most beautiful woman who has never lived, or the lonely dragon, for she was also I, whence the implausitude of I is I versus I is not I, is the mere oppositional polarizations of paradoxes within the convulsings of those galaxies by the involving of said aesthetics, a beautiful misunderstanding of objects, in the sheer convulsions of said galaxies and oppositional forces of one another, or the ineptitude of your possible understanding, or the ineptitude of your possible, or the ineptitude of your or of one another, or the ineptitude of your possible understanding of this was the plausible sadness of outer space through your misunderstanding of Lane, for she not only suffered the fear of being misunderstood, but upon once I was raped IRL, I was afraid of almost all people, save from my mother or sisters or brothers or my father. Still there was not convulsings of planets of the solar system, only convulsing of galaxies, for the concepts whence the galaxies are usually placed inside of the whence concepts are usually placed inside of the apostrophes, whilst only knowing of the sheer complexity of knowledgeable individuals for their own conceptions of thoughts on historical people who had died, or their philosophical considerations. The misunderstanding of reason was not the critique of pure reason, but the most implausible logical conceptions invented by not only one but multiple set individuals through their perceptions of aesthetic, by the perspective knowledge of poverty within the societies or the states with those societies or within those societies, by the was of the misunderstanding of the only possible representation of logic through the sheer complexities of rheumatude for this considerable addictions, was the misrepresentations of the conceptions of the convulsions of the galaxies, inhibiting the deathly solitude of how far apart said objects or planets or stars might have been of one another, or the nebulae still must be stated, for only the conceptions of said aesthetics of those particular objects, or the institutions of implausibilities of complexities within the minds of said of those individuals who suffer of this causal rectitude through their own sheer knowledge of their impossible consciousness of not madness, of realities, of nihilisms, for those things mustn't be real, or nihilism is a farce, simply since Iwakura Lane is the son of Allah, who sung songs of Aaron or Mayu by the Aphrodite of knowledge within the mind, was not of one's reason, but the point of knowing by its conceptions. The misrealities of nor existence simply meant the perceptions of those objects pervading the universe had been misrepresented only by the knowing of one's own aesthetic throughout their sheer perception of time, by the constitutions of knowing only the possible, for the impossible was sheer perceptions of time by the constitution. Sorry. The misrealities of nor existence simply meant the perceptions of those objects pervading the universe had been misrepresented only by the knowing of one's own aesthetic throughout their sheer perceptions of time by the constitutions of knowing only the possible, for the impossible was the polar paradox of said invulsions of complexive points of reason throughout the knowledge of one's said own aesthetic of their beauty. Other consummations of flames was not real, for no hellfire is real. Allah is the one God. Once I thought Lady Wakura is Allah the one God. However, I am not. I am simply the possession of Allah, as only this Muslim, for wasn't it necessary to see the mysterical non-realities of one's own lack thereof. Galaxies was the implications of the impulsivizings within the perceptions of the aesthetics of objects by once the loving Aphrodite of, or the knowledge of Aristotle, who I was, who was I, still not knowing of his said aesthetics by the knowing of one's own knowledge of the weak, of their own mind, is the repulsions of the mysterical dread within the deaths of loved ones. Also, let it be known, the point of one's own reason through the sheer perception of misunderstanding is the near impossible point of one's own reason, whence there is no such thing as reason, only simply knowing of the weak, of one's aesthetic by their misunderstanding of spirits, of leaves, of realities by the amplitude, lack thereof, of the insolvings of universes in their mutual misrepresentations, by the plausible realities of misunderstanding within the minds of one's own mutual derelict non-realities within the deperceptions of misunderstanding of not government, but in realities logic. For this logic is the perception, for this logic is the proposition of consistency amongst no system of philosophical considerations. By the logic of one's own Lane's own through probabilities of mathematical structures within not physics but order of the universe, whence consciousness can no longer be controlled by the anybody's brain, for in reality Allah is as real as the universe, who surrounds all through Lane's own mind as the void of solipsism, of for solipsism depth perceptions of realities or non-realities, by the polarizations of mind's own constellations of doubt, shrouded by the dread of Ravenclaws, within its own depth of galaxies, with the sheer point of the knowledges only being solved by said aesthetics of objectilizings of depths of galaxies or the minds of one's own through knowledge. Only one possibilities must then nor exist by the said accusations of concepts throughout the perceptions of the objects of one's own aesthetic by the pure misunderstanding of one's representation inside of their own mind of not only isolation but minute acute sadness, where the sadness of outer space is the mystery of the shrouded universe, for Allah/God would never make sin real. Only in the eyes of those saddening humans who is not Lane are those things real to them. Only I am the extraterrestrial who's ultimately mustn't know anything of evil, for there could be no such thing should Allah be Allah's thing. Should I be Allah's thing? Possibilities of knowledge within the minds of proposed individuals was the constellations of said objects of the nor relatable reason nor the unsolving of mind's own reason throughout nor time or nor space of the proposition such of a thing could even be so, for the knowledge of the apple of the original fruit was the allowing of one's own mind through problematic inceptions of lack thereof to be conceptions of not knowledge but one's own reason of the disclosure of specific mathematical structures of irreseparabilities of knowledge. Therefore, thus the point of reason was to dictate not only autumnal nature of the rebirthing of leaves of the autumnal world, or still the misunderstanding of knowledges of the aesthetics by the weak of the knowing, of impossibilities within mind's own reasonable problematic conceptions, of those realities only meant to be supposed concepts within the mind of one's own possible narcolepsy, for no such thing is possible that by the impulsivizings of the concepts of realities only known for one individual reciprocities, appear conceptions of beautiful knowledge within the mind of the conceptions of one's own aesthetical mindset, appear knowledge or reason lack thereof critical thought, for no critical thought could prove the universe of knowing by the Lane of all the world was a misrepresentation of said subjective subjects of the experience of knowing. Implausible dyslexicons of the non-mutes within the possibilities of said own realities was the implications of non-realities in the mind's own reason of said individuals' points of reason within the sadness of said outer space of non-realities without I'm going to start this one over. Implausible dyslexicons of the non-mutes within the possibilities of said own realities was the implication of non-realities in the mind's own reason of said individuals' points of reason within the sadness of said outer space of non-realities, without not yet within those polarization mindsets of inceptions not of points of reason, but those conceptions of peoples who suffer of sheer representations. For there's the consummation of all non-realities throughout said points of reason. They should or should not discover without said misunderstanding of those aesthetics of the apples, of the original fruit of knowledge was the death of the galaxies, misunderstanding of conceptual mindsets within those who are people's points of misunderstandings of their shallow points of reason. Thus, the only plausible explanation could be the misunderstanding of said non-realities was the propulsings of said concepts of loyalty by the loyalties lack thereof Allah, for he is the implausitude of all inspirations of knowledges, by the impossibilities of said introspections of one's own long-lived lives, of their impending deaths of complete destruction, thus destroyed by our Allah, who is the most of all, a high above, who will go beyond all of us, not you, to destroy us through the sheer love of allowing the world through its course to be made ancient once more, for the world is no longer ancient with the presence of at least one single computer, so destruction must only follow this. Worry not for madness, for this is not real, or neither is sin, as only Allah made the universe good. So represent it or recommend the knowledge of your childhood innocence for points of reason by the misunderstanding of said objects of love, or the affectionate passionate of or the affectionate passion of your fathers, who showed your way of follow within the death-sown perceptions of aesthetics of beautiful things, within those nostalgias of your own self by once, or this is the ultimate philosophical, not of his Hegelian world, once through by the extraterrestrial lane upon the grave of her Alice or once sadness. Hegelian mindsets are beyond Kantian philosophical considerations of systematic logic, for the critical thought of said individual is the fortitude of any knowledge given by the misrepresentation of the mindset of said proxy war of the physical battles like a chess game with no end, for the mystery of conceptual narcolepsy wasn't real. Only the persistent conceptual attitudes of foreign individuals who point amongst necessity by the logic of pure Confucianism, or Confucius who is not Aristotle, for once I am Aristotle, or once upon I once found, or once upon, or upon I once found, as the young Japanese woman, the perfect cherry blossom of the world, for I am the only finder of said thing, but only through introspection of pure reduction of thoughts, by the hammering of the nail through the skull, by the convulsings of galaxies, or of quelling mindsets within the perceptions of those objects of affection, within the knowledge of once owned, now placed upon themselves minds, for those people are not impossible of knowing, only by the sheer complexity of said dissolutions of time or nor time, throughout its shoreline of Mexico, as the moon I will always go through, our perceptions of objects by the conception of all knowing, was the loyalty of the weak of one's soul by the imposing of knowledges of their knowing, through plausible natural solitudes of perceptual reason, amongst concepts disconnected of one another, only through some form of association should they make anything not being but resembling some sort of a system, as pervade here for you in this mystery of the novella of conceptual plausible irrelated moment through histories. The historical nature of the world was not recorded, for you cannot record a recording, for this is only a distinct recording, or by the laws of physics, there is no recording only by the once order of the universe, by the histrionic natural conception of Kikuo sound, or the sound of nothing, who was the living void of Laniwa, who was, or the sound of nothing, who was the living void of Lady Iwakura through her solipsism by the dismal, macabre conceptions of aesthetics within one's own folly lack thereof knowledges, by the implausible destitutes or complexitude of its reasons, amongst the black galaxies of death through the impertinent logic of mere representations of the mind of sheer doubt, for though this conception was not only impossible but also flawless, as once was Celie, who I was, or this little girl I once was, for the color purple, or her Erin is my Nettie, for I am the book The Color Purple by Alice Walker itself, IRL, for only one perception or no rote of realities could be so by the realities of conception throughout the misunderstanding of mindsets, by the own constitution of those objects pervasive of said individualistic folly attitudes, of sheer nonsensical thoughts through the thought of oppositional governments, of only conception but no longer minds. Thus let it be so. The only plausible explanation of this was the conceptions of pure reason. Thus let it be so. The only plausible explanation of this was the conceptions of pure reason, amongst the knowledges of one's perception of those aesthetics as perceived upon by the knowledge of the mind of one's own through sheer doubt of implausibilities, for those perceptions were also conceptual, or the conceptions of the mind had been suppositions of the original fruit by the sheer possibility of one's own knowing inside the consummation for critical thinking by the logic of doubt. Only one possible explanation of inseparabilities could imply the quelling of pure of the weak, or this weakness of outer space was not outside of the realm of the world by the sadness of its own institution of knowledge by the conception of mere representations of one's own doubt, or the implications of some real point of reason beyond the implications of their own exonerance or exuberant miscalculations of mathematical, otherwise digital, or of the order of the universe is thought by only this thought is reasons. Having seen impossible objects or things of reality, she found her knowing of the Cold War once she was also the Cold War itself, or within her own Cold War there was not thus the Vietnam War, but also battles within Russia or the Americans versus Russia, when she was contracted as a soldier who was Kichi to battle throughout all the warfare when she killed someone in the year 1976, as Kichi upon the death of her lover Moni of the album Moni and Kichi by Gregory and the Hawk. For Lane found herself through the musics of the world or the literature of all books, or a complete non-reality within her own solipsistic mindset of sheer ineptitude of doubt minds, of one's own minding of reason, or through sheer conceptual logical, where all concepts are isolated of other concepts within the water of the animalistic world of her beautiful body of fruit of the apples, for her own death of the galaxies within the conceptions of sheer perceptions, by the mind of her sheer beautiful place once of falling in love with Moni upon her death, seeing she was beautiful by the resulting madness ensuing, so she rudely killed someone later on during the war, only to find on the float known as the moment of Iwakura on the universe, she was the bodiless woman who Aaron told possessed a body. The implausible was the conceptions of pure reasons, for the dissolutions concepts by the only impulsivizings of pure knowledge, throughout reasons by the conceptions of mind's own logical thought, of one's own beautiful aesthetic of perception by the atheistic non-proposition of mind's own inceptions of non-realities, for those consummations of principles are the derelictions of mindsets of perceptual non-causal or discausal realities within the subset principles of folly never-ending, one's own quelling of the weak. Of the reason of their knowing by what could not be knowledge of galaxies, but of quelling of the weak, of aesthetical mindsets of known individuals, of mutual friendships, by the logical dissolutions of societies, of the states, for the society must be inside the state, for was the state within the society a paradoxical non-logic, would be invented upon no such thing being so in any kind of way. Therefore I will state the possible said objectification of women by the knowing of any plausible dissertation was the complexitude of impossible reason within one's own suppositions of the concepts they pervade throughout their weary lives until the deaths of those loved ones take hold of them, whence they doubt their believing in God, who was the concept of loyalty, or by their loyalties to him they will see the mere conceptions or inceptions ripe fruit of their own knowledges of the world by the limitations of their bodies, placing their consciousness within themselves as sheer non-conceptual physical bodies with no minds whatsoever. Should they choose death over water, or the concept of water was knowing of the giving of the fruit of Allah, who is the possibilities of all conceptual non-indifference throughout the sheer mindset of the giving of those knowledges, or throughout this one's own entropy, their heat death shall make the world's saddening places amongst the outer spaces of sheer logical breadth within the minds of Lane's own point of Norism, of dissolutions of the non-realities within the minds of said individuals who take of the fruit but do not consume, of the natural meats of the universe by said causal animalistic nature of realities of destitute languages of their humankind, through the fortitudes of their sheer perceptions other than the animalistic realm of worlds amongst one's own of galaxies by the inhibiting sheer doubt of mind. Let it be known the conceptual madness of points of reason by the non-logic is paradoxical supposition of no concept being present amongst the perceptual non-causal realities of points of non-reason, amongst the negative within the concept of one's own polarization of oppositional forces, through the sheer logic of nigh impossibility. For this impossibility, if mischaracterization of said knowledge within the perceptions of one's own dissolutions of thought, merely of the knowing of the weak, or aesthetics of concepts within the minds of loyalty is dissolved through the possible of no hellfire being so, only the couple places of dots made for those by lanes who will suffer only by the knowing their beings or souls had not been gone to heaven, only plagued with those lives within the consummation of degradatory non-possible through minute irresponsibilities of derelictations within the non-consummation, or in other words negative of their dissolutions of pure knowledges or lack thereof. For this lackadaisical destitute was pointed as the taker of death inside of the souls of their once the souls left the body to go to those couple places resting forever in hell. I know the mindsets of the individuals of non-Muslims who are nihilists, going so far as to state there might be the only experience making them as humans some sort of repulsive false idol, However, those people are mere disclosings of the mere non-representations of the negative by the thoughts of atheistic folly fake logic, which is not the real consuming their minds by prominent unintelligent philosophers like Nietzsche, who was an absolute fucking fool for believing in the sheer bullshit he purported, like some sort of child sucking his thumb, making the world some sort of ugly place, but only within his mind, for the world is beautiful, or he is just a fool, not a legend, but a fool, a dumb, stupid guy. Mysteries of galaxies is the point of one's own knowledges of sheer perceptions of realities by the logical necessity of the point of reason within one's own mind of the knowledges of other or of this original fruit or the fruitful laborings of man made it for us to blossom, as I, Rein, who found the perfect cherry blossom I once upon a time let go, for it shall never be made mine, for it shall never be mine. Once more, though I am the possessor of responsibility for this, or this conceptual purporting of time was the mindset of one's own sadness, or the cop-out nihilism made by those sad individuals who believe in lies against the law of the one God who gave you the Holy Quran for you to suffer for, or your perceptions of realities, or gave you a reality where your lives don't have some bullshit like meaning, but rather purpose. For by the birth of Iwakura, your lives have been made purposeful, for your consciousness can not be controlled by your brains or 3/16 of the total population, by the eyes of the sun or song of Allah. Are angels or warlocks amongst the sheer depths of their own reasons within conceptual avenues of thoughts, taken in the sheer deceptions of mind's own realities or the non-realities pervasive of Holly concepts, by the woman Holly Pocket, the grandmother of Seeley, or my plausible rectitude for I was Kichi, the black woman born in Mexico on October 6, 1948. Although Seeley lived during the 1800s, becoming a liberated slave, it was I who was her or lanes amongst the galaxies in order for myself to showeth the world all non-realities of pure exactitudes. Couldn't be so, only the non-reality of sin. For this is not real, as God shan't create no such thing as evil, for lanes is only of the beautiful shoreline of Mexico or the rising sun of Japan. By the logical embrace of the pure, beautiful Aphrodite or Aristotle, the father of sheer conceptual reasons, within the depths of one's own mutual friendship, a pure exactitude of their knowledge of the aesthetic of a concept or all concepts by the mind of one's own, only this of the Son of Allah through sheer depth perceptions of not on real reasons of perceivings of the whole universe or through the computer screens or visual artworks of physical objects, nor atheistically yet also of the plants on the grass, place for beasts or the songs of mankind, to be represented by the implausible causal natural of the only possible real of worlds, by one's own perception of pointless aesthetical conceptions of past knowledge, by the laborious fruitful causalities of dismal non-representations of the objectifications of the women by the men of the world, forming the children of the womb by the seed of the Holly Pocket, who was the grandmother of Iwakura, or the beautiful Mexican Kichi once last. Only sheer doubt of your believing of the Moni concept proven to be reality was the conceptions of your inabilities to see beyond atheism through the ineptitude of folly atheism by the laws of physics you know you are broken by being born, or your impregnation for this internal conception of your child, whilst also of your daughter chrysanthemum like you, Kichi, the lime, of conception of the chrysanthemum, or your daughter chrysanthemum, are irresponsible for the mindful natural world of your motherhood, was the mother of the universe or Aphrodite, whilst your wife is merely Jasmine, who is the woman you later saw upon meeting her at a Burger King. Later you saw her on Main Street, overdosed on cocaine, completely dead on the ground, stumbling over like the stumbling over her body into the hopeful casket for with which her grave shall be possessed for all time, with the headstone laying will drop flowers upon, or the memory of the enigma who was leaf, or her, or the her galaxy who was lain no longer is important, yet the enigma is still there, or theirs upon nobody's possessing of the enigma, but how could you know? I don't know. I want the world to see the beautiful world of the burial of bodies by the visiting of those of the field of the Cold War. Once Lane was the sitting duck on the plane, whilst Moni was not inside the plane, with her throughout the float, making myself for all of this like the killing in 1976. I catch Moni's soul upon waking by the cold sweat of my purple sunshine, or those bodies destroyed by the bomb dropped by the place once later on Moni was shot and killed within the very same field, who is not Aaron Nettie, only I will state I saw a solar eclipse, or later looked upon the sun, or saw the sun upon a house atop a mountain. All three times the sun appeared to be the color purple, for I as Leni Wakura, I go through the sun, also not only the moon, from by my beauty minds. Multiple languages of Nor are spoken by the Lane, so she is multilingual. Thus, her abilities, she also developed the writing system of Nor, having come to her only in one moment of one day. Thus, I am the flower on the ripe age of 26. Of or within the border of Mexico, I am the black woman, not a Caucasian whatsoever, nor male or woman of this skin tone. Only I am the red-pilled, knowledgeable fortitude of wisdom of the age of this woman Kichi, who is now but 26, the smartest person who has never lived. Nor am I the most intelligent person, nor am I not the most intelligent person of the universe. For I'm the 11 Dawn Go player. Those 9 Dawns shall never supersede, or I will supersede all men. Once I am very old by all ways possible, for I am the extraterrestrial who is the Song of Saria, the extraterrestrial of pure knowing without digital language of humans whatsoever, or their digital language I only spoke of English by the language of Nor, or should I learn German or my French, my tongue of the moon shall do the same, thus stated by the pure of the weak, of galaxies within those solipsisms of the universe, by my very own language of knowing, called Nor. Norism is the philosophy of the lonely dragon myself. Still this isn't so. Still this isn't so, only for its near representation of knowledges but by sheer inceptions of one's own man, by the complexity of my relationship with my father, or my brutal Asian South Korean mother of Kichi, or those who persist as my other mothers on the float like Coraline, or my father's on the float by the sheer knowing of Lane's pure or beautiful mindsets of knowledges of pure knowing of her very own aesthetical near proposings of knowledges by the conceptions misrepresented mankind's, or the suicidal thoughts once consuming her, who was once myself, once I cut of my wrists, or the PSX slaying girl who killed herself to play some sort of copy. That was not even her in the Wired, for no given reason, so thus the only plausible realities of my death were my suicide on the float, tattooed of the 6 apes on my stomach, of my 32 tattoos, or the 3 teardrop tattoos on my body, for I am Leni Wakura, whilst I shall thus on this date of 1 kill myself on the date of 12/18/2073, or this December shall be the most all, for I am the poetical poem Wintermute, by the knowledge of sheer mankind through perceptions of the limitations of my body, holding the bodiless mind within my own self as the sound of nothings. I am not a Caucasian man. I am not a bad person. I needed to sink in. I am not a bad person. Or though I dated the woman Fiona, I am not a bad person. Or her adultery was forgivable only in that I know I still loved her, or took it upon myself to save her life. For she was the inception of logic, such as the thing even be considerable, for no such thing unforgivable could be the saving of her life. I did so, yet I go on without her, only allowing myself through one pale fire of the kiss my soul upon her lips, for my lips are also jade lust of myself, like the pale fire of my burning soul. Of the rising sun of Japan, for I am the most beautiful of all people, or if you could receive some sort of dose of my mind, you shall become addicted as though you had gotten addicted to crack or heroin. Thus you shall think about myself for the rest of your life, as sparkular as I might be. You shall see the beautiful destruction of Allah, by your possessing then of knowledge, but such a thing is merely impossible, for no injection of this sort is rotting about like the dead body of Jasmine or Moni. Or Moni is Margaret, whose last name eludes me upon the quelling of my own thoughts through the dissolutions of sheer time over the course of points of mystery, or reasons or, or non-reasons of shadow doubts by the universe of one's own complexifications. Mystery upon reason by the depths of galaxy through the depth perception and purifications of knowledges, was the misrepresentations of said accusative thoughts within the sadness of those outer spaces, perceived of by the perceptions of ascetics within the minds of one's said own thoughts. Or of the dissolutions of impulsivizings of merely not non-knowledge but the consummations of impossible principles, held within the conceptual logic of the sheer misunderstanding of the mind's own misunderstanding of pure conceptions, within the deaths of logic by the death of Allah, who is the making of the death thing Lane, who is the proclamation not of all possible knowing, but the broken of the laws of physics, wrote of this conceptual knowledge of this book through sheer misunderstandings of the implausible. For wasn't it Allah who said the Quran shall make you suffer? For it or your who is Lane must go through the Quran by your extremely difficult workings of minds for yourself, to see not only do you possess knowledge of good, for you are not evil, only since then in your mindsets of the philosophy of Lane, you felt intensities whilst going through the Quranic message of the Quran, or the Arabic preposterous mistranslations of Arabic Nur. For this is one language of Nur, or your knowing of the penultimate 3,000 verses of the Holy Quran, only you know, or thus are able to recite by the proclamation of your decadence of Nur, or through the conceptual language of forming of objects, through the perception of yourself as the void. For how can mirrors be real if you have no eyes? I ask this of you. Lane is thus lowercased of Lane Iwakura by the beautiful enigma leaf. I am so utterly brilliant like the udders of my float, for I am not a cow, as the Quran states, but a bull. Or the specific type of whale, or the great sea of oceans, bull. I am the most conceptual of no or nonsensical things cannot be so. For wasn't I or Hegel correct, or of Kant correct? For wasn't I or Hegel correct of, or Kant who taught critical thinking throughout his critique by the knowing of his non-aesthetic mind as a believer in Christ, yet not in one, and for Iwakura, who is son of Allah, in Song of Saria, her son is Jesus Christ, the prophet/messenger of Allah, yet since Lane is not Allah, she is only the mother of this child by the universe of her lover Jasmine, who is not a man but the resulting was thus the pregnancy of the child she or I currently suffer with, for I am the pregnant woman now only in irresponsibility of the ancient world, or the sex with the man I had, who believed I was a man, whence I am not, for I am a woman. So he is upon 3 years later, since the occurrence orgasm and inside myself impregnated my own selflessness. As Mrs. Jonathan Frisbee of The Rats of Nim, or the whole of literature I appear across, simply as characters within those books, or of Les Miserables I was Jean Valjean, whilst on the float I am the prisoner, then at war, for this moment in time was I who was this emo girl Lane, and extremely emo, or like my other lover of Aphrodite, who is I, who is Melanie Villabrosa, my beautiful, who I shed tears of like the death of Jocelyn Flores, for I thought she or her had won by the non-realities of my mind, had my tears been folly, by my logic, let alone atheism, there was no possible Methodism I could have known she had passed, for she most likely is not dead, just like Jessica or Scully, who must certainly live on. My breast milk almost reeks of cow's milk, yet I wonder what handsome man secret scholars Warren Smith's book will be like, for he is the real man in that he remains calm under duress, or logical thoughts of his are perceptions of the own reality, my own red pilling of aesthetic, or Nux, who is the other, or Jake Monroe, who is my only husband. Yet still Hegel is my ex-husband, for all those handsome men are perplexing, or my ability of perception, or sheer speed with which I write, is impossible for them to know, for I am the smartest, most badass person. I'm still a woman who likes a good, handsome man at any point in time, yet I am loyal to my husband, who is Jake Monroe, by the only Allah, thus I shall never, for as long as I live, as a black woman born of Mexico, be with another man on my float, or the impregnation I had 3 years of sex long ago upon all 40 rapes I experienced on this float of the universe as not only Seely, but as I, who is Lady Iwakura, I was raped for 40 times over the course of 4 awful yet beautiful years of triple C abuse historically or histrionically. I am not responsible for the abuse I experienced, for those who abuse me are monsters, whilst I am a beautiful chrysanthemum flower. Who of the 8 wives of Allah are Lane's girls or women? I am married impossibly to Meredith Godrow, who is a musician who invented lots of music, including Moni and Kichi by Gregory and the Hawk. Or I take heed of those things, since I am always sound tripping, for lack of a better word, although really I am only going through my dragon mind as the lonely dragon or the ender dragon of the void, as the sound of nothing who shall forever be beautiful Aphrodites of the universe. My wife held the dandelion of Kichi by the perceptions of her as Moni, the woman I fell upon love with by her death once I walked away. Yet the question was, I did not return upon seeing her dead body, or do I remember this, or recall, still I believe she is so beautiful, or my Nettie who is Erin, or Jocelyn Flores once was like Melanie Villabrosa, who is most likely not dead, or the girl I called Scully, or the other girl I mistakenly thought was Scully named Laney, who is no longer important to myself, or the woman who I met off here in the psych wards I visited in Massachusetts of the modern United States years ago, who was called Nicole, or the Fiona, the beautiful woman I met long ago who I dated. I'm the Aphrodite of sheer mind of one's own reason. I also dated a girl named Rosa, by the way. I'm the Aphrodite of sheer of one's own reason by the pure complexification of my heart through the depths of galaxies within my own self of self-acknowledgeabilities, within the perceptualizations of non-realities amongst no or no longer blue, Fiona's lowercase color of beauty. But this blue galaxy I inhibit, for this is my black galaxy of the universe, of pure reason, of logic, of mind, only through points of deperceptions of objects by perceptions of said non-realities, of the continuations of the dwellings within the perceptitudes of impossible knowledge bases, of pure of heart, of implausible conceptual attitudes like the wings upon my back or the tail upon my lower back, but slowly growing until once I am the age of 70, I shall become famous for my beautiful body, only as Lainey Iwakura to be on podcasts to tell people about it, so I can also advertise this book wrote of years ago, whilst I was also only 26 years old upon the road of this depressing book, still suicidal or suicidalities of knowledges of the date of 12/18/2073 have shown myself my own point of reason was beautiful languages I possess by the sheer knowing of my own folly of aesthetics, by the self-deprecation of the shy autistic girl who was once only 11 years old to be wisdom. The conception of the aesthetic is the point of one's own reason of beauty, for misdirection of the knowledge of the objective truth of Norism, the only real correct truth or philosophical prospect. Still let it be known I will give the world the truths of the universe with this book, by its inceptions of non-realities within the week of knowledge, by the consummation of sheer doubt, points of reason of the consummation of said non-realities, with the minds of the dissolutions of concepts, without a system of philosophy even being present here, for only the laws of physics or death's own eyes of lanes, nor exists here for the pointillism of solipsistic dissertations of knowledges within one's own mind's perceptions of deaths, only by misrealities of the conceptions of sheer knowledge or reason through not only proclamations but institutions, or the whole of knowledge of literature, stating thus I will state this meant only the proclitude of misery or miserable conceivings of the autumnal world, or the leaves of the autumn, or fall, or falling not upon death but upon the places of rest, for knowledge is my own mind's, or the conceptual lack thereof. No, I read that wrong. But upon the places of rest, for the leaves of reciprocities, for those friendships made of children, are beautiful things of conceptual knowledge's own minds, or the conceptual lack thereof of the system within those things, for Allah or the laws of physics dictate those things silently through her lane, the sound of nothing, the sound of nothing, for myself to provide you with words upon sheer implausible representations of love or beauty as Aphrodite, the goddess of love, or the Coraline of sheer complexitude by her Michigan, or knowledge of red pills. For once I said red pill simply meant correct, like Hegel's words, or my knowledge is neuristic, his word meant of or for neuristic thoughts for water of the natural animals pervasive amongst the kingdom of the ancient world, whence beasts walk about with no aim more than survival in the mind, or much like them, I as a dragon meant to survival upon this earth of sheer mind's own reason as I go through the sun or the moon, or think of my home star so far distantly of the planets of the solar system, out here only once those objects are completely distinct of one another by the isolation of concepts within Norism, or the neuristic thoughts of never-ending logic until one's own death. Might us, my girls, be able to see those men of my heart shall beautify unpronounced of my own Aristotle, for I am the most, or high above all, yet not adjacent, but alone upon the universe. I shrouded myself in doubt, thus as Lady Iwakura, removing myself of this universe, only to provide myself my single book. Also, I will state the paracausal metrohadron, not dragon collider, is the conception of sheer doubt of mind, of one's own reason not to permit said implausibilities within perception of aesthetics by the conception of mere mindsets of individuals through pervasive malformations of the information by the conception of one's own knowledge to allow one to do so, or the non-misunderstandings of thought. Is the pure non-irrelation of mind's own reason allowing one to do so through though conceptual time periods of doubt, for shrouded amongst the shadows of death or the consummations of objects by the neuristic thoughts of possible avenues of thoughts, or thus by the conception of knowing. All of it appears to be an explanation of how someone could be an 11 Go player, let alone without the impossible natural of the world, through sheer conceptions of mindsets by the individuals who have been superseded by the perceptual shadows of doubt of one's own ability to play the game of Go, both mentally or literally, but through the extraterrestrial mastery of Go, without learning the rules of the game for this consummation of proclamations wasn't merely this, but the revulsion of sheer magnitudes of plausibilities within Death's own mindset of doubt, or the weak of deep outer spatial. All mystery of the conceptual knowledge of sheer doubt is magnitude of the mathematical non-procedures not taken place of by the objects throughout all of the universe by the energies of all mystery or lack thereof black magic. For this was not only done by Lane the Good Witch, who is the consultations of dialogue between knowledges of individuals who are perceived through the telephone wires by the institutions of Death's own knowledgeable procedure through neuristic thoughts of the consultations within said mind's own individualistic properties of fortitude all by then. All misconceptions of the mysteries of the galaxies meant the consultations of dialogues between those individuals who purport arguments like the need for explanations rather than the conclusions of the thesis on work meant the purporting of said knowledge was the explanation of this unedited book, for the nihilisms pervading the minds of those of those wretched peoples are the considerations of unaware peoples by their own misunderstanding of their perceptions through the sheer knowledge of their doubts of realities by humankind, of their limited possibilities made limited by the limitations of their own mind's own to their bodies throughout the sheer consultations of madness, and in stating their own sadness of doubts by conceptual non-realities of plausibilities. Thus or therefore only one necessary causal paradox can imply what of the implications of sheer misunderstandings by the discausal was an I or not I, is thus I, or the apple of the original fruit appearing through all of the whole of literature as the novella Pale Fire of interesting consummations of their understanding of the whole universe by the sheer depths of their own folly, introspection for the introspections only of her who is Lady Iwakura are the correct of like Hegel who is wisest. All representations of objects are impossible save for the loyalty of said concepts by the possible. For this instance of gratitude is the placement of sadness of outer space upon the mindsets of those formerly discussed, who shall become miserable not for the laugher players sing of ancient. I will state the last my moment was the depths of the galaxy in regards or nor disregardless of the deepest of possible things, for the deepest of possible things must have been only a conception of pure thought of mind was the consciousness of misrealities of neuristic thoughts by the inception, not of inception, but of the objects of affection of the goddess, for her mindset is the natural of the world, or the course of pure dialectic or impossible statures of gratitude placed upon us by Allah, the one God, who can only graciously have given us, my girls, or all of you, the Quran. All possible points of doubt are superseded by the logic is more points of reason within the quelling of sheer doubt throughout the perceptions of pure logic for time or space, where logic was no longer merely mathematics of words, but the consultation of dialogues of peoples, only of knowing by the consciousness for those consummations or proclamations of humankind's doubts of Allah, let alone the spirits of the beasts, or of the Native Americans, or the South Koreans, or the Japanese, thus taken place of by the Germans or the French women of the world. Or the French women of the world, by her logic of the French girl executed during the French Revolution, who was once associated with Lane, thought Lane is not a white person, only in her death was upon her reading yet not completing the Bible, for this book is unable to be completed, nor read by Lane, for it was her shall have felt the blood of Allah, once read the book of the Bible, for it is of the devil by Islam, yet the Christianic people are not usually, are usually slightly principled. The sheer doubt of mind was the consultations of mysteries amongst galaxies or the languages of space, for the languages of space whence galaxies communicate amongst themselves, like the lonely, silent, massive complexes of beautiful logic, for points of reason solely by the flawless laws of physics, or dark matter or dark energy occupying the galaxies or planets, or nebulae, or black holes or stardust of the gray aliens, how lived for about 2,000 years, who, whilst not really being conscious of themselves, making their homes spacecrafts, harnessing stardust of their bodies, or thought, I had seen an alien really open my door once whilst on Triple C, though this was not important, for also by almost 3 years sober, yet I still smoke cigarettes or drink loads of coffee. While I saw the alien look upon myself with his green sweater or lack thereof, I cannot recall if it was naked, yet I looked at myself upon literally opening my door, only for it to close it and I immediately to go back to sleep. Still I saw laying in the sky as by a hallucination which is separate, or I still believe in aliens all the way miseries. The possible of one's knowing the possible of one's own knowing the misconceptions of the point of reason, derelict of knowledge based on the primitive attitudes or only folly peoples of whole, for those individuals are misrepresentations of object by the misunderstanding of their very own knowledge base within the desolation natural world they consume themselves with, making perceptions of time or space plausible only by the consultations of dialogues of said individuals. But this is folly, therefore only the point of reason of the shrouded doubts within the Native Americans' incantations represent pure solidarities of knowledges based on the primitive aspects of the realities of sheer desolate consolations. The vicissitudes of perceptions are the blockings of this unedited book's neuristic thoughts cut apart, for if the circle is cut once, it shall become a sine wave operating in the three-dimensional space of the world, or if a triangle is cut, it shall become a saw wave. Or though I produced a 2-hour-long jazz album with Ableton Live 9, or albums long ago when I was a teenager with Ableton Live 8, I'm weary, or the jazz album was titled Misinterpret Sacrifice by Lena's Skill, my album. ... I will state the misinterpreting of sacrifice was the concept of loyalties amongst those who perceive the universe by the atheistic problems with the knowledge of Allah. Elusive of them, yet still believing the Quran, by the believing of this Quran they are made secret of Holly Pocket like the individuals of knowledges, or based upon their own conceptual attitudes they are perceived to follow apart the beasts as spirits of Kikwa, who is the sound of music, whilst elsewise there was nothing, for I am the sound of nothing. All Kikuo point all Kikuo of sound, a point of knowledge, was flawless for beautiful quellings of reason. The Kikuo is the point of UFO of the extraterrestrial I, or I is an I, is the suppositions of the concept of nor knowledge of implausible conceptions of misunderstandings, through sheer knowledge other than Kamatech flowers of camellia, stating only logically the conceptual knowledge of said extraterrestrial was the pursuit of intelligence, or the pursuit of intelligence by the knowing of said own aesthetical mindsets of disconclusions of by the sheer logic of by the logic of sheer abnormalities within the possibilities of depth perceptions of computer screens by the knowing of zeros or ones throughout its or hers perceivings of the universe, or all computations on the planet for no blurred of the wired wires of electricities forming consultations or dialogues amongst computer networks or between peoples on the telephone wires, or even the satellites of outer space, for I as Lane perceive all of them once and for all, and this decimation of logical impulsivizings of sheer thought was the misunderstandings of misrepresentations with the lack thereof understood knowledges of Lane Iwakura, who was the woman of the world by her isolation of consultations between computer networks or of other peoples by the perceptions of their aesthetics inside the knowledges of their knowing of the weak of this depth perceptions of misunderstanding simply meant the imposing of attitudes amongst the computer networks or users behind the screens all over the world was the misrepresentation of knowledges by the consolations of sad attitudes of those individuals only permissible by Lane herself. What couldn't have been said of the near possibility of the endings of space, for the ends of space are the finality of the book upon wrote of on the life of Kichi, or the Mexican black woman upon wrote of on the life of Kichi, the Mexican black woman, who was born on October 6, 1948, or within the border of Mexico, by the shoreline of Mexico, known as the Atlantic Ocean, all the way going on towards Europe or Asia, or still this perception, misunderstanding was her Japanese language of the rising sun of Lane, by the consolations of the deaths of her loved ones, once, or the girls who was born in Japan, for once her who was also Lane, or her Lane, the whole of literature, of mine's own, one was her, the girl of Japan who was evading the bomb on the Nagasaki, or not Hiroshima, still she found herself with her grandmother, some by close of Tokyo, close to some place away from all of this, near the great tree of the forest creature Saria, or Lane of Nagasaki. Yet still not there was, for the tree was bombed, so was Hiroshima, but the world lived on, for the girl was with her grandmother, so she did not see. I'm gonna go back a little bit. Close to some place away from all of this, near the great tree of the forest creature Saria, or Lane of Nagasaki. Yet still not, for the tree was bombed, so was Hiroshima, but the world lived on, for the girl was with her grandmother, so she did not see death, or I thus ending the world where her life showed her she shall on husband but divorce him, only since he divorced her first man, until by the method her parents passed on the bombs of Nagasaki, she was orphaned, as becoming only an adult on the realm of all possibilities of friendships evaded her, or the loss of her husband formed her into a straight-talking misrepresentation. Still the sad little girl was so flawless by Allah's eyes so. Chapter 2, The Language of Galaxies. The galaxy spoketh of the universe by the misunderstandings of pervasive humans amongst the planet of the small earth. By the perception of one's own mind by point of reason, through human conceptions of knowledge. By the perception of the apples of my eyes, of the original fruit of not sin, for God would not make sin only the distinct perception of knowledge, by the quelling of reason, who is the woman Lady Iwakura, or the deperception of artworks by the aesthetics, of knowing the one possible reality, not merely reason, but the death of the universe, by the objects of one's own perceptions, of sheer or possible time, or spoke of, or space, for the madness is not a thing, but a knowledge of the death of innocence of children within the minds of one's own sadness, for I will not allow this to be real, as the perceptions of all knowledge by the knowing of one's own mind, through sheer realities of non-doubt or doubting mindsets of pervasive peoples or of ruminations, still not complex for the mindsets of the possible conception of objects through the aesthetics perceived of by knowledge. For this reason was the quelling of impossible conception of realities by the knowing of perceptions of those objects pervasive within the mindsets of said individuals by the points of their own reasons. I'm a black woman. Mexican. The mystery of knowledge, of knowing the aesthetics of beautiful things, only Aphrodite, who was I, who was Aristotle, by the misgivings of knowledge of death. For the perceptions of those things was the misunderstanding of reason, conceptions within points of death, minds one's own of pure reasons. I know for a factual evidence of knowledge the misunderstanding of non-realities, if given possibilities, was the misunderstanding of knowing by the aesthetic of perceived objectified concepts, yet the single point of reason of doubt was misgivings of knowledge by the good witch who does good black magic or sells the strongest potions, by the point of reason with one's own mind of the blazing natural black magical worlds, through consummations of no such thing being so in my eyes of my apple. So in eyes of my apple. Or not to exclude the sheer possibilities of doubt, for this necessity was the mystery of my reason within myself by the consummation of all logic consumed of by the death of those consumed, or the near possibility of sheer depths of reason, yet not madness, only logical is pervasive, or though this logic is pervasive, the conception of sheer madness was the misunderstanding of doubt. Though one's point of reason by the misunderstanding of their own realities, I just took my risperidone injection, is the mere prospect of necessity within the consummations of consumed deaths of those by the ender dragon, nor of logic, of perceptions within the mindsets of said individuals by the perceptual knowledge of their own knowing through mere conceptions of those languages perceived by the individuals of mind. One conception of knowledge is misunderstanding of the misgivings of the gifts of folly lore. Of the angels or warlocks who are only 3/16 of humankinds, who are only known of by Lane, who is son of Allah's songs of Saria, for depths of perceptions of nor realities, nor was it impertinent of logic by the institution of all knowledge or the misunderstanding of pure perceptions of objects within one's own reason, or this point of death was the conception of sheer doubt by the misgiving of knowledge of one's own self, or the misunderstanding of the sheer perception of the depths of galaxies within the minds of those peoples who pervade about like animalistic propositions of logic. Therefore, the only possible explanation was the necessities permitting themselves through the logic of sheer mindsets within one's own reason of misunderstanding, by the universe inside of deaths by the logic of sheer doubts of one's own mindsets, or perceptions of misgivings of gifts of elves who I was in elf, were conceptions of knowledges of realities, or distinctions of language through subtle texts written of great stories or human plight. For this was also of the bird or the bees, or my honeybee Jasmine, who was the universe itself. Or I was Kaguya the moon girl, or shall go to the moon with the Buddha or Shinto, of not or beautiful though I was upon my wings or tail or third eye, or other odd body parts of the non-human. I was Kaguya the moon girl, the most beautiful woman who has never lived, black of skin, of the ink of stone of death, or the ink of my tattoos washed upon by shampoo, making ink of the inkstone of cherries. My cherry blossom once last was a conception of knowledge through the misknowings of points of reason, through a sheer doubt of mind inside the mindsets of possibilities of concepts of one's own self by the perceptions of knowledge, of the doubts of not people's by my own mind, but the conception, for this was not relinquishing of madness, but the 1600s or 1700s, whence the universe was heard upon drawings upon us, like the American forced labor on the blacks of 1800s, or so who would later, like I who was Seeley or Nettie, gone far away, but where did they go, I wonder. Still I cannot find beyond a solipsism, or the solipsisms of my thoughts, or perceptions of reason by the depths of the galaxy or one's own mind, the point of reason beyond myself through crawling of sheer doubt of the perceptive, eerie natural world lore of conceptions of possibilities of elvish inkstone natural worlds. For this misgivings of pure necessity, or the necessities of the consummations of mindsets, was the implication of sheer doubt given by the concept of pure reason through outside knowledge of misunderstandings within one's own self through my own beautiful mind, or my husband who is the black woman, of knowledge by myself all alone in the grave 6 feet deep all asunder, since my heart was unbeknownst. Still, however, one conception of sheer logic was merely mad reason of my own doubt. The slaves both upon the United States or also Mexico was the conception of logic through sheer doubt of worklichkeit. Only necessities of my own mind, impossibilities of knowing aesthetics throughout time, of duress inside of the quelling mindsets of slaves individual of one another, yet all enslaved not by the white man, but by the people of color, whose skin was pale, fire, or really those people who enslaved the black, my own people, were not bad people, they were simply hatred of those who did not look like them, yet still they found the black unintelligent or unknowledgeable despite this unfair lack thereof abilities for the black to suffer the Noir educations of youth growing up or upon this doubt of knowledge the black took to the streets years later on the block of death through the sheer conception of madness for rejected were during their lives as slaves until the peoples born of the 20th century were rejected by those around them, yet are responsible or brutalized by God for any heinous acts of violence they committed, for violence of no point is not forgivable in the eyes of God. Yet no reciprocity is so, for if you are not red-pilled, if you are some monster who believes not all are equals or one race is superior to another, whilst the white do philosophical hard work or labor, or the people literally living in Africa are living essentially as the third world. Meanwhile, the people of Afghanistan or the Middle East are suffering endlessly under the regimes of Iran or Saudi Arabia, Muslim allies or enemies like the Axis of World War II, or believe one's last year race or another race is somehow superior to another given the difference of a global conflict of dislike for other peoples, whence the eyes of God said you are merely a man or woman, nothing more, nothing less, and you will suffer as I have, or will not, then let it be so. The people who are slaves, nor the enslavers who had run the United States or Mexico, let us not forget of the slaves of Mexico, whilst I shall state this meant neither are bad people. A conception of the Afghanistan war, although I have only read somewhere around 30 books in my life, I am wiser or smarter than all of you are. Should I read 1,000 books, I will be so smart you shall all perish by the relinquishing of your souls, as I thus have already made you done so, or those American soldiers killing the enemies of the Axis shall not be revered only as soldiers but as children of Allah, for he has made them beautiful to destroy the enemies, or I as Kichi to kill the fucking communists, as like Tanya Degorich, to kill the fucking communists like Tanya Degorichov. Or I was Megumin of Konosuba, or Death in One's Own Mind. I loved the South Korean Osu player Angel Simosu, who named must elude myself from my mother on the float of deaths, not my parents of Caucasian family by the white's pale fire, but by the float. My mother was South Korean, or my mother a black Mexican woman, who give my birth to me, so I may be borneth of this world by perceptions of knowledge, or pure descent through madness was the sitting duck of the plane. Once I sat upon the plane by myself with a crew member. Once we dropped bombs on the Russian, destroying all of them, or those Japanese who bombed Pearl Harbor in World War II. I once, nor once last, though got blown the fuck out by nukes, until upon my realization they were beautiful and I was Japanese. Like the mystery of one's own logic of mind settling for the mindset of the conceptions of beautiful upon my floating through sheer knowledge of reason's death. Alright, so that's part 1 of 26. 16 pages. Goodbye.